Welcome to the Blueprint to Building Wealth workshop. Let's learn and grow together. Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. He's a native of Jacksonville, Florida. He received his BA from University of North Florida and MBA from Wake Forest University. He has over 20 years of financial experience, including financial planning, consumer and commercial banking, and several management positions. His expertise is in marketing strategies for several institutions. And he's very passionate about teaching people to plan today for tomorrow. With that being said, let me introduce Mr. Nathaniel R. Jr.
Thank you so much, Amber. So I like to be animated, so I'm not sure what I'll teach you, but I know I won't put you to sleep. So, for starters, there's a pen. It actually works, but it has a little tip on it that you have to take off, so I don't want you distracted saying, this guy gave me a pen that's not even working. So tonight, I've been given an opportunity to share or have a conversation with you about building wealth. And that's what this is about. One of the things I'll say is that I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't get an email list. I'm not going to be calling anybody. So this is an open forum just to share. I am in the financial services business, but that is not the end game. The end game is just in part. And man, what an excitement just to see 40 of our sisters just solid right here. I'd pay to be in front of an audience like this on a daily basis. You all definitely do look good. So thank you for having me here. One of the things that she said was about about building wealth. The words that she said is about being controlling, having control over your destiny. Part of how you control your destiny when we think about wealth and financial planning is through knowledge, through what you learn and through the resources that you bring into the equation of your life to help you with this. One of the most craziest things about financial services is that we dangerously self-prescribe. If you think about all of the different areas that you say are important in your life, most of those areas will have some resource or professional in the equation. But this is an area where we do it ourselves, or either we have a lot of parts that aren't coordinated together. And I'm going to talk a lot about that. Financial empowerment, again, is about knowledge. The other thing about financial empowerment and wealth is it all starts with your imagination, your vision of what it is you define as wealth, which we'll unpack. So again, there is no right or wrong, but when you think about the road ahead, you think about wealth, you think about your vision, it all starts with a white canvas. Because if we go around this room, everybody has a different definition of wealth. And that's fine. The whole idea is, here's where I am, my present, and here's the desired future. So the whole idea about the wealth creation plan is the bridge between where I am and where I aspire to be, or the picture or the vision that I have. Now, there's a lot of things that can shape your vision. Jay-Z, Beyonce, Taylor Swift, your pastor, books you read. So there's a lot of things that shapes that picture. So I'm not here to prescribe that picture, but basically talking about the different lanes in life that we move to as we step forward into our definition of wealth. And then what are the speed bumps along the way that can be disruptive and will be disruptive to this vision of what you may be building out in your head that you want to happen, okay? So let's turn along in the book, and I'm going to reference sometimes page whatever. So I'm on page 2. So you open the book up, I talk about how I love my sisters and all that, and then you see an old white man as soon as you open the book. It's kind of a contradiction, right? But here's the thing. Everybody here knows who Albert Einstein is, right? So obviously the father of atomic energy, helped with the bomb, ended the war with Japan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what I find interesting is a man who has been deemed one of the most intelligent men in existence of humanity as we describe it, defines compound interest as the eighth wonder of the world. Those who understand it earns it. Those who doesn't pays it. Now this is an area that we could camp out. If we were at, getting our feet done and we had some wine or lemonade, we could talk about this all day long. But here's the biggest thing is, your life to some extent, when you think about resources, is two currents running against one another, right? It's kind of what we say we want to do and what we're doing. So on one side of the equation, we're buying all this stuff. Now I like my stuff too. We're buying all this stuff, we're incurring debt, but at the same time we say we're supposed to be doing these things around accumulating, saving money, and making choices. So we have these currents that are running against one another. This lifestyle, this use of money, this use of debt, and then the allocation of the money over here that we're supposed to. So the question in everybody's life is, which current in your life is stronger? Is it the current of use, the current of debt? Is that current overriding this current of accumulating and saving and setting your life up and protecting your life? Which current is winning? And in different seasons of your life, different currents win. But ultimately, which current do we want winning for the end game? And a lot of what we do is understanding, here's what I say I desire, here's where I am, here's how to get there, here's the disconnects, and here's the speed bumps and the roadblocks along the way. So again, he characterized this as the eighth wonder of the world with all the things that he said. So I'm going to move on to just our topics on page 3. You know how they say a good speaker tells you what they're going to talk about, they talk about it, and then tell you what they talked about, right? So you would think that's easy. That's not always easy. So again, these are the topics. We're going to talk about defining wealth. What season am I in life? And the thing is with seasons is seasons come and go, and they come back around. So regardless of where you are in life, whatever season that's in, that season may not always be here. And that's something that I want you to think about, because again, sometimes people feel like coming to a financial advisor, it's kind of like my wife does this, and none of y'all do this. My wife cleans the house before the house cleaner comes, right? I understand that, but I've been trying to figure out love for a long time, and I'm not sure how I'm doing it yet, but what I'm simply saying is sometimes we tend to say, well, I want to get myself in order at this point before I go sit up in front of someone and talk to someone. And that's not what you do. That's kind of like only going to the dentist when the toothache starts happening. So I want to talk about that. Then the next things I'm going to talk about is roadblocks. Okay? And I characterize roadblocks into two things, choices and protections, and we'll get down that road. And then we're going to talk about financial priorities, because more than likely, most of us are in some form of relationship or partnership or marriage. There's so many new terms now. There's just somebody else in your life whose name is on your checking account. We'll just say that. Or somebody who's covering cable, or you cover utility. So part of what we have to also think about is, how do we chart a course with financial priorities? Because even if you have a vision and you're in partnership with someone, the order in which you want to approach the vision, it's always kind of hard to figure out how to talk through that. So it's a fun exercise that with your loved ones or whoever is in the equation of your life, you can talk about that approach. Take an inventory of where we are, we'll get there, solving for the gap, the power of the savings, which builds on that first page that we looked at, vehicles for retirement and wealth creation. Okay, mutual funds, stocks, cryptocurrency, flipping real estate, life insurance, savings bonds, $50 in your bra, $300 in your mattress. I know nobody puts, I want to unpack that, but I had a grandma who was always good for a 20, so. But what I'm saying is, I want to talk about vehicles. Tonight is not necessarily leaning on any particular vehicle, but remember, they're all just vehicles. It's not necessarily of what's right or wrong. It's like your mix, your flavor. No matter where you go, you can talk to someone who can tell you a story about how they've made a fortune with the same thing And you go on this side and someone can tell you about how they lost everything, right? So tonight is about just understanding what are the kinds of vehicles and mechanisms that you can use for this journey. The last thing is about charting a course, and we'll get to that as well. So let's move to page 4. This is the only question that I'm going to ask you. If 2 or 3 of you all would just share with me your definition of wealth. What is a definition of wealth? No right or wrong.
Being financially stable.
Being stable. You think that's an easy thing to do in this economy, but it's tough. What's another definition of wealth that someone has?
The way I view definition of wealth in my household and how I try to teach my kids is intangible money and tangible money, adding it all together and subtracting it from your debt.
Okay. I swear she wasn't a plant in the audience. Other definitions. Thank you.
Financially, to be financially prepared.
Financially prepared. Okay. And one more.
To spend less than you make.
And then there was another hand.
Having enough money, property, and assets to meet your needs and some of your wants and desires.
And then there's another one in the back.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was writing and thinking, but my
Okay.
definition of wealth is, and I know it's not generation, I know you didn't put generational wealth on there, but just my definition of wealth is to know that if I pass away, I have enough wealth to leave on to my children.
So ain't gonna be no GoFund with your picture on a silk screen. Other than me is tired of GoFund. Just me. And I sell life insurance for a living, and I'm still sending money to GoFund. I don't know what's going on. So, okay. So here are some of the themes that we have: being stable, tallying up tangible and intangible property to create a wealth position for your household, to then pay off debt or be over the amount of debt. Being financially prepared. So loaded comment, great. Spend less than you make. Now that's not American now. That's not, who came up with that crazy? Time, we need to escort them out. We're talking about spending less than you make. All right. And enough assets to meet your wants and desires. Now that's real tricky too, right? Because I'm always trying to figure out my family, what column are we in right now? So, my wife, you get that stare, right? Y'all know about that stare, and then you just kind of back up. So, I understand what we're doing. And then if we pass, like you said, being able to have something for your loved ones, and again, talking about generational wealth. And that is such an in vogue term that we are speaking a lot. But when you lift the covers up and say how much of our life translates into us being able to set the next generation up, it's really interesting. It really is interesting. One of the other things I'll share with you all that's interesting is if you're anywhere in financial services in the industry, they do tons of research, and they are a lot of people. The number one most underserved segment of people in America is this particular audience. You're the most underserved, most looked over, most neglected in the country. African American women in your age range, the most underserved market. And it's a lot of interesting whys on that. That'd be another day spa type of discussion as well. So here's a couple things, and I'm not going to burn you out with writing stuff down, but I just put here a simplistic definition of wealth. So on the first line, I put retirement assets / savings plus other assets, which is cheap, and I throw everything under there, plus insurance proceeds minus your debt equals wealth transference. Very simplistic definition of wealth. So, interesting enough, literally everything that we all talked about in this prior page neatly fits under this umbrella. So again, we all, from a thematic standpoint, have a general understanding that the wealth equation is after what you accumulate in this life or from your death triggers some accumulation, minus what you owe equals to what you pass on. But before you pass on, that pot is what we end up having a comfortable and stable life with along the way. So the key is, we accumulate, we got to spend some, pay off some debts, then we kind of live off of it, and then what we don't live off of, we then pass on. It sounds simple, doesn't it? It's kind of like, why am I even up here with something that simple? It is really pretty simple if we think about it. It's just all the things along the way in those steps that brings the noise in our life. And we all have noise in our life in a way that affects financial decisions. So let's move to the next page. Page 6. We talked about vehicles. So when you think about the wealth equation, for the most part, in the natural, because there's a whole other concept around kingdom wealth, but that's a whole other session. But in the natural, for the most part, everything that is tangible or intangible loosely will fall up under one of these categories, because we talked about the accumulation of tangible and intangible items. So houses, real estate, that has always been a common vehicle for us for wealth transference. And when we start talking about the wealth gap, which I could definitely unpack a lot, when you look at us as a group of people versus the majority of the what do we call white people? We'll just say non-black people. So interesting enough, and most people don't always understand the historical context. Mama in them house, if it was worth anything, wasn't even worth keeping. And then we either tore it down or they had a few rental properties that didn't really do anything. Well, if you wind history all the way back to the early 1900s, unintentionally or intentionally, our government system structured mortgages that the majority group were able to get, and they were able to build houses at higher standards in neighborhoods that normally started along the train tracks. So they had this explosion of growth of housing, and their houses went up in value. We couldn't get government funded, even with the GI Bill. Our soldiers would come back, and they couldn't even get the mortgages. So what you had is this kind of spreading forward, and we're dealing with only funding and building houses that were substandard or not code-related and not funded by bank debt. So what you had literally is a transference of literally almost 3 generations of housing, where those houses were going up and up in value as they passed them, and we had homes that were not funded by debt and that were somewhat substandard. So all of a sudden, if you fire the gun in the 1900s and one group of people get to run around the track 4 or 5 times and they tell you go, wealth creation in houses has never been a significant vehicle for us like the other group, because of the legacy of the way things were structured, accidentally or not accidentally. Then you have redlining. So even now, this is really within probably the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen appreciation in our homes, and our homes having value and having equity. Whereas the majority group really was a lot further down the road. Cash and securities, I bunch those two together. And we'll talk about it a little bit. Playing it safe is the most dangerous thing to play. All of you all probably know what a Series EE bond is, right? You know, Aunt May, when she died, she had the King Edward's cigar box, and it was full of EE bonds that stopped paying interest. 10, 15, 20 years ago. We accumulated our money in things that historically was earning 2 to 3 or 4%, okay? We were not in the equity market. Generally speaking, history of the stock market is about 8 or 9%, okay? So there's a thing called Rule 72, which talks about the compounding effect of money. So what you do is you take the return and you divide it by 72, right? So let's say if on average you were making a return of 3%. So 3 divided by 72 is, what is that? What is it? 24, right? So something earning 3%, if you have $10,000 and we're racing, so this is a 3% lane, and this is the 9% lane, right? So if we look over let's say a 50-year period, the gun fires and you're off. So 10,000 over 50 years, if money doubles every 24 years, that means 10,000 goes to 20, 20 goes to 40 at 3%, okay? If you're in the stock market, just plain vanilla stuff, Procter & Gamble, Target, I'm not talking about nothing sexy, I'm not talking about no Shima, currencies or whatever. Okay, 9% divided by 72 is 8, right? Okay, oh my God. We start off at 10, over 50 years. 10 goes to 20, 20 goes to 40, 40 goes to 80, 80 goes to 160. So here I am at 160. Now Aunt May, who had her money in those EE bonds, where we at? Imagine if that is the decision you're making on the horizon of your life, if you're in instruments, bumblebeing around at 3 and 4%, that's only a third of the return. So that explains a lot of the generational gaps that we have, because literally several generations of us had no access to it, no familiarity, and there was nobody from Shearson and Lehman calling your grandmama, telling her that Coca-Cola, you can't lose with it, right? So again, it's one of those legacy gaps, but we can close the gap because we're knowledgeable now and we have control. Retirement assets, which is a big vehicle. Most of us historically grew up in either civil service or government, and our money was accumulated in some form of a 401k, 403b, 457. But what option did we pick? What option did Mama and them pick? Lord, I don't know nothing about that old crazy stock market. I can't be putting my money at risk. So while we have been dollar cost averaging, and even when we did the right thing, Mama and them was picking the fixed income because I ain't messing with that old crazy stock market. You left that crazy old stock market alone from the late 60s, early 70s, all the way through the 2000s. I mean, so what does that do? So ultimately in the end, you haven't accumulated as much. Then when you take the money out of those investments, then you put it back in another instrument of 3 or 4% for another 20 or 30 years that you live. So over your lifetime, from maybe age 20 to the end of your life, mid-80s, you're talking about a 60-year time horizon where your money was only doubling every 20 to 25 years when other options gave you an opportunity for your money to double every 7 or 8 years. And you don't even want to talk about what the stock market is doing now. Last year, the plain vanilla stock market was up 26%. I hope all y'all was in on that. 26%. Plain vanilla stuff. Stuff you were going out and feeding the earnings of every day in Walmart, Target, Sam's Club, Costco, and we're on the sidelines. Something to think about. Business interest has always been a good thing. Obviously, the wealth creation opportunity there is unlimited. The heights that you can go and the depths that you can fall. So that's another vehicle. Insurance policies, which we'll unpack a little bit. That's always been a nice compliment. And I'll say this about life insurance. Now, one of the things that has done a lot of us right has been permanent life insurance. Many of you will have had experiences where the passing of someone has been as a result of being in some form of a life insurance policy. Here's what I'll say. Cash values in life insurance policies are great. But you know what typically the average return is on a cash value in a life insurance policy? It's 2.5%, 3.5%, maybe some policies you've had, it may have been 4%. It's still back at the same thing. I don't have a problem with cash value in life insurance policy, but it can't be the vehicle to take you fully across the finish line. Cash values in life insurance policies can complement or augment different things in your life. If you had a baby and you said you wanted to look at mechanisms for funding college or whatever else, it's not ideal for me to tell you to just pump up a universal life insurance policy and then grab the cash value for college. I might say that might come into the equation, but it should always be one of the legs to the stool. Historically, they were safe for us because they were contracts, and we most of the time couldn't get flim-flammed on those because, again, as a group of people, historically we have been taken advantage of by a lot of predatory, kind of marginal kinds of industries within the financial service industries. So it's a safety thing because typically one thing black mothers do is buy some life insurance. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but it's never going to spin up in a way in terms of in that person's lifetime where it's generating so much cash that it thrusts your life forward into a new dimension. It is complementary. That's more of an opinion. Cars, again, it's an asset. During the pandemic, my car went up in value a couple times, so that was interesting. But again, it's an asset that transfers, and then personal property can represent a lot of things. The next topic on page 3 is, what season of life am I in? And this is something that you have to kind of always understand. Where are you? And again, they can move back and forth. Are you building? Are you young and in love and everything's right? And every 3 months, everybody's getting a promotion and you thought the raise was going to be 3% and it was 7% and you're going on the sales trip. Are you there? Are you growing? Are you on suicide watch because you let your sister talk you into going to grad school and that water's a lot deeper than what you had thought? You don't have no wife, you done missed your hair appointment, trying to get this paper done. I've been there. Are you maintaining? Is life good? You done finally got rid of them kids. They off your payroll. And now instead of a parent, you've become a coach. Because one of the favorite things I love to say to my son now, if I was you, this is what I would do. And he's like, oh, don't go there again, right? Because, the speaking is cut off. But, so are you there? Are you building a legacy? Whatever that means. Meaning life is comfortable. You're thinking about your children. You're thinking about your grandchildren. And what are some of the ways that you position and create a legacy position for them? And then recovery or rebuilding. Have you been like me where I've owned a couple of businesses between being in big enterprise and not having the first marriage to work out, right? So, those disruptions happen, right? They happen. So where are you in that season of life is what you need to ask yourself. Because in every season, there's a different priority stack. And sometimes we go back to a season of survival mode. And when you're in some of these seasons, if you get the wrong advice, it can alter or affect the road ahead for a long time. So like one of the ones that people say is, Lord, I feel so stressed, I'm just going to file bankruptcy, right? You just hit the bankruptcy button. You just throw it up. They call and call. You're behind on your mortgage. You call and call, and you don't even know that there's resources out there that will step in and pay your mortgage balance for up to a year. You don't know that the bank, through the Consumer Protection Act, says if you can pay something in many circumstances, that bank has to drop the interest rate to 0 and turn the amortization to 40 years. If you're not talking to the right people when you're in the dip, you can make the wrong decisions. And again, it goes back to self-prescribing or just feeling like it's just too much, right? And I understand that. I've been in all these seasons, and I've counseled people in all these seasons on all levels, all ages, all genders, and all colors. It happens to everyone. So what season are you in, and how are you navigating through that? Okay? Now, the next two, roadblock to wealth creation, is called choices. So, I like to have fun with this one on lifestyle. Now, you can create wealth, you can have fun, and you don't have to live like a pauper. You know what I mean? And again, it's never all of any, right? But sometimes we reward ourselves too much, right? And it's a matter of finding it. And the thing that I always tell people to do, and this is the thing, you know, when people come in, and I don't know you as a client, and you're coming in and you like all high throttle, I want to, you know, do this, that. I'm like, and I'm telling them like, wait a minute, you hadn't saved any money. You went to a New Year's Eve watch service, and you go from saving no money, now you want me to flip a bunch of switches where you now all of a sudden saving $800 or $900 a month. You know what? That's usually not sustainable. The whole idea is do things in stages. You don't have to go from doing nothing to trying to close the gap all at one time. Everything that you should do when I talk to clients is I say, we got to balance it with sensibility and affordability. And never let anyone amp you up emotionally to do things that you don't behaviorally or lifestyle can support. Because there's no need in starting and stop. Because what I always have people say, yeah, I had a policy, but I messed that up. See, my thing is, and again, because a lot of it is you've been in a circumstance where you stepped off too deep. Do it in stages. Now, the other thing I talk about is a roadblock is unproductive people in your life. I have children and I have a lot of cute terms here. Now, you know they family. Now that's your family, right? Now there's a balancing act to that, right? Now he need help. Now you done went to school and you can talk over everybody here, but he family, right? I don't know why everybody laughed, but I thought that was just my family. Okay. Now you need to help your brother now. You the oldest, and he didn't have all, you know, when things were coming through, he didn't have. I'm just saying, how do you put your arms around that? Because again, one of the things that's not always safe without the assistance of wine or whatever makes you relax is looking at your Cash App history all at one time. That can overwhelm you, right? So again, it can be a roadblock. Inconsistent earnings. Now again, I know entrepreneurship, right? But you know, you got to step back from certain things, right? And you got to be careful with what I call the baby boy entrepreneur, right? You got to have some consistency in your life. And I tell people sometimes, dude, you need a job. you know, it's funny. When you're young, broad shoulders and deep voice and smelling good is sexy. Baby, I got a PPO. Baby, I got Again, you got to have some consistency. There's a point with the seesawing of earnings and income that can be very disruptive to your life. Because part of a lot of the ways that you create wealth is something systematic. I mean, this up and down, back and forth, and I made this much money in this currency and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes being able to find something you can do systematically, even if it's $25 or $50 a month, can turn into massive amounts of money, which I'll show. I talked about family burdens and obligations, and they're real. And everybody has to take a different way to unpack that. Because at some point, one of the things we do, and I talk to black women about this quite a bit, there's a balancing act to loving and helping to enabling, right?
Yes.
And what happens is black women at the end of the road, many of you end up by yourself, exhausted and not as well off as you should be with nobody really stepping in. You know, the one thing they always talk about on a plane, if a plane is going down or whatever, no matter how many people on your road, the first thing you have to do is put your oxygen mask on. There's a balance between helping, selfish, and self-preservation are three separate lanes. And I have constantly had to counsel my black female, my sisters, multiple times like this, like, well, hold on 1 second now. Now I understand, you know, he was young with the divorce and all this other stuff. Okay, he's 36. Why are you still co-signing, right? Why is he on your insurance? And I'm always picking on baby boy because I'm a baby boy, you know, in the sense that I'm gonna do self-deprecating on a male. That's what I mean. So again, a lot of that is you have to unpack that because it does become a tremendous undercurrent to your own life. And I just see that spiral, and baby boy, I just want to shake him. I do. I just want to shake him. Aging parents, which is really complicated and tricky too. That can be a real roadblock, and that's something you got to manage through. Because you all have probably seen instances where, you know, Madea gets sick, and she steps into a certain level of care, the government takes in and just wipes out everything they have. Now, rule of thumb is, anything you do 5 years backwards that's no longer in, you know, Madea's name, that don't happen. And you have to be skillful and planned in understanding that. And many of us pour so much money into Madea and them, we don't even realize that we now can claim them as a dependent. See, so you don't get all this going to H&R Block. A good tax return is not $70 for the preparer. Pay some money, sit down, talk to some people about strategies. Cheap ain't always good. You know? I don't want y'all raising your hands, but how many of you kind of flow through Target a little bit more than you do Walmart, right? Well, that same basket of goods was, you know, $4 or $5 cheaper. Well, why are you in Target? You follow me? So again, just kind of understand there's a lot of dynamics here. And again, generosity. It goes back into that same lane. And we enable people. And my joke always with people, and even amongst me with my guy friends, is I say, boy, we monster makers, and I won't unpack that much. But understand how we sometimes enable people. Because it's not as much about let's add up what you owe and your cash flow and blah, blah, blah. There's so many deep-seated behavioral things behind the decisions that we make. And having an advisor or a person in your life who can help you unpack it. Listen to TED Talks, listen to books. There's so much ink that's spilled on this whole body of everything. When you think about it, let's just say on average you make $50,000 a year. And you're going to work for 40 years. So if you think of yourself as an enterprise, at the top of that enterprise is $2 million in revenue. That's pretty significant, right? So then the question is, on an average year, how many hours do I commit to reading and studying on how to manage this lifetime enterprise of $2 million? How many seminars do I go to? How many times do I have a checkpoint with someone about tax, insurance, and financial planning? Well, let's deck it against the family reunion, planning for the cruise, setting up the GoFund account, setting up the meetings, setting up the programs, getting the t-shirts, getting the skits prepared, getting the pastor to come in. If we look at all those hours against how many hours on a yearly basis, we think to educating ourselves and getting more equipped for what is like a $2 million enterprise. Now, first of all, on average, most of y'all are probably way more than an average of $50,000 over 40 years. Let's just say 100. Now we're talking a $4 million enterprise. Well, if you're married and you didn't marry baby boy, we might be talking about a $7 to $10 million enterprise that you are running. Do you think about yourself as an enterprise? And if a board of directors was to look at the way you're running this enterprise, would you get fired? So, let's move on to the next topic. Roadblock to wealth creation protections. I talked about the first one, about outliving what you save, right? A lot of that danger is either not saving enough or not having a blend of vehicles that have a longer runway to grow and compound. Which means, first of all, think about it. You can either save less and have it to perform better, or save more and have it to underperform less? I mean, you never thought about it that pragmatic, right? So the question is, what do you want to do? No, I want to save more and have it to perform less. No, they'd fire you. The board would fire you, right? Health coverage. Do not be messing around with health insurance. One of the biggest things that tips bankruptcies for people is health insurance. I mean, HMOs, PPOs, or whatever you have, do not leave yourself exposed. Because just by show of hands, who's planning on a tragedy this year? Okay. All right. Well, if you know for sure you're not planning on any tragedies, drop your health insurance. Just drop it. If you're not planning on a tragedy this year, this is a big disruptor. Prolonged sickness. Been at a job, you got your vacation, you got your sick, whatever. The number one cause of bankruptcy and foreclosure and repossessions is tied to disability, more so than anything else. Not losing your gig, getting sick. Who plans on ending up with a sickness? Did anybody know anybody with COVID that just couldn't shake it? Sick for 6 months, I had migraine headaches and almost filed disability. It's a threat. You're now talking about things, and this is how I present it. You make $60,000 a year. Disability, typically without very little effort short term, I give you $3,000. My company can pay you $3,000 in exchange for you giving me $1,800 of the 60. That sounds like an even swap. That don't sound like a swindle, does it? Disability can tear your life up. Somebody hits you in a car, don't have automobile insurance, your insurance walks so far out, your major medical might get funky with you, but at some point, the pain and suffering, the inability to work, it happens every day. We all know people that you say, Lord, Geraldine got in that accident, and oh, I mean, her life is just, you know. Now, the first 1 or 2 Sundays, everybody got their hands on you and giving you a little money. But you know, your story get old after about 6 or 7 weeks, right? We off to more new tragedies. Hey, it's just us. Lawsuits. What does that mean? I mean, you think about your commercial reel. If we cut on a commercial right now, if we cut the TV on right now, here's what you're going to have. You're going to have Progressive, State Farm, and Geico. Then you're going to have Morgan & Morgan. And Fair. They try to tell you something, right? And what they say, well, you know, it's not really Amber. We're suing her company. We're suing her insurance company, right? Well, as soon as Amber exhausts her automobile coverage, I'll get them stupid low rates. And then after you exhaust them rates, they come after your stuff, right? And if you don't have no stuff, how about 20% of wage garnishment into perpetuity? All right, so you high-fiving getting them crazy low rates with the General's insurance, 10,000 bodily injury, 10,000 in collision, and then you hit a Maybach, right? You have these exposures. Early and untimely death, life insurance, okay? Don't make a mess when you die. I mean, one of the things is this, there are studies that shows most people project that life insurance is going to cost about 300% of what it really is. You don't need all that, right? Okay, I go through some calculator and overwhelm you and say you need $600,000, but your money good for $150. We'll get $150 coverage. Don't do the all or none, and don't put yourself in environments with agents that talking about your life and your finances feels like a timeshare presentation, because you know how it is. Now we just going for the trip. Now we're gonna go in there and all. Don't say nothing now. Just let the man do his thing, and you hear the bells ringing, bing, bing, and then coming back. Well, we got a special thing. There was some foreclosed properties, and I know you said 400 was too much, but this here is only 219. Now, your family needs this. financial decisions with who you're working with should not feel like a timeshare presentation. Find a professional that's there to talk to you, not make you feel like today only, because that's kind of the issue. And no estate planning. So here's the danger with no estate planning. Generally, it's called intestate, which means if you don't make a will, the judge will make a will for your family, right? The biggest thing is this. When you pass on, you want to make sure your stuff don't need to go to court and folks with drama. Because I'm telling you, boy, talk about a loving family drawing swords on each other when you ain't clarified all this, okay? And the whole idea is through titling assets, and even with your home, you can bypass that whole probate issue. Because is anyone in here an attorney? Okay. So here is the way many attorneys approach it. They structure a will. The way that they structure the will is that the will in its nature needs to go to probate in many instances. So they structure where they make money on the front end and then they make money on the back end. It's just very expensive. Now the reality is there's a lot of ways that you can bill your estate out where it bypasses probate so everything could be done up front. Don't feel so panicky like I'm glad it's over. There's more information on wills and trusts out there. That's just good stuff. You can just Google anything. You gotta get an understanding of it. The other thing also that people have to understand is in simplified terms, you can almost control your money in your grave for almost 20 years. It's actually 18 years and 9 months, when you start getting into the different perpetuity clauses. But what that means is, if I have an unproductive son and I want to leave him part of the estate, I might have his money poured into what I would call a testamentary trust, for example. And that trust says, now baby boy, his share of the cut was $300,000, but baby boy just getting $20 the first year. And then I may put conditions. I will then fund reasonable transportation. I will fund reasonable housing. Because sometimes the way we leave things to people, we can destroy their lives. Now Lil Ray Ray ain't never he don't even bring change back to mom to the grocery store. But you're gonna leave him $150,000 in cash straight up. What are you doing? Ray Ray won't even bring the change back. You gonna leave him $150, right? Then there's other funky things like, okay, Karen and Tina, her daddy, it was a bad call, right? They 11 and 12, you got $500,000 in life insurance. You pass, the road can twist in a certain way where this unproductive spouse of yours could end up being the guardian over those assets till they turn 18. You got to unpack all this. You can't be sitting in front of the lawyer, because if you don't say anything, they're going to give you plain vanilla. Because you're like, well, how much this costs? How much is this? Well, if you say nothing, he says nothing, he mumbles a little bit, has you to fill out a very simplistic form, you probably get out of there for $300 to $600. And you get what you pay for. Cheap ain't always good. So that could be a big disruption. Financial priorities, if you go to after page 10, because this wasn't numbered, we'll talk about fun exercise. Make 3 copies of this, right? No. Make 6 copies. Let me explain. So let's just say you and I are married. We make the sheets. So you say, baby, prioritize your priorities and prioritize what you think my priorities are. And then y'all sit at the table and look at how the numbers are all over the place. Right? You're talking about trying to get these kids out of school and you still around here talking about that boat. Right? Right? Or You know, he's worried about retirement, and you're talking about dream trips. You know, you're talking about, what is that, Viking cruise? Man, I want to get it. The guy with that accent. I can see myself going up down the river in Europe. You know, so a lot of where people have discourse is because they don't unearth their differences. This is a very simple form, and I have to always make sure I don't end up in marital counseling when I do financial planning. Because it's your differences that are shaped by your beliefs, your desires, and all that other kind of stuff. Because even like with my wife, I self-identify as a protector and wanting to build covering. And sometimes I think what that does is absolves her of any sensible things to do with big chunks of money, right? Because she's like, you got this, you the man, right? You're always talking about man stuff. So again, this is a great exercise. And I would encourage you all to do it if it's safe in your relationships. But just to project what you think his or her priorities are, it'd be a lot of fun. So y'all thought this was going to be serious and stressful. I came to entertain. Solving for the gap, okay? Page 13. These are the ways you solve for the gap. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a page. Excuse me. Page 12. Simple equation. When you think about retiring, here's your current income. What's the desired or needed income? The most comical thing in the world of financial planning is people say, on average, you should target to have somewhere between 60 to 70% of what you make. But here's the craziest question. When was the last time when you had downtime you spent less money? It's kind of dangerous, right? You know, Amazon's killing my family about $17 at a time. It's like, who packages this? I get home early, get my package. So I can be a class active hypocrite. But I've been sending it to the job too. So, you know, again, a lot of it is understanding this, and I'll get more into how we do that. So the next thing is, I talked about solving for the gap. These are some of the same thematic things in terms of assets, how you can fund them. And then I want to get to page 15. Remember when I talked about you as an enterprise? If you're married or in a long-standing relationship, your enterprise, money coming in, could be anywhere from $2 to $8 million over a 40-year period. Because you never really think about the aggregate of how much you make, right? Because if we said your household brought in $10 million minus tax, right? So you netted $7 million. Where in the world is that money? Somebody done stole it, right? Where did that money go? So there's two classic things which you all have probably seen. Let's look at the first one. It's called a personal financial statement. On page 16, this is a template you can fill out, and there's no short supply of these on the internet. It is basically looking at your company, you as an enterprise, as a balance sheet. What you own that we talked about with net worth, early on, what you own versus what you owe. The fancy term for it is, what is your net worth? That's one of the other definitions of wealth. So the thing is have you ever made a tally? Now I know everybody got that yellow pad with their bills on it. Well, you know, everybody's all modern now, and you got all kind of fancy apps that hide the evidence. But if you just manually sat down with your enterprise, your board, and you said, let's just take an inventory. Do you even have a negative net worth? Sometimes we do. So in the wealth equation, you're actually negative. Oh my gosh. It can happen. So what relates to this is the next page, which is your income and expenditure statement. Just like any enterprise. You got a balance sheet, you got an income statement. And again, this is the same thing that's on your yellow pad. Some of y'all high tech, you might have it Excel and your notes. There's all kind of slick ways to do it now. And there's templates, there's Quicken. But this whole thing is about taking a tally of what's coming in and going out. Now, the thing that's dangerous is, back in the day, and many of you all were there, where I remember early on, Mom, I'm a grown man, yeah, I hear you, but bring your buddy in here with your checking account ledger. Remember I used to balance your checkbook, and you'd be all stressed out when it was off $3 or $5. You go in the bank, get a printout. Where's that $17? What happened, right? Now we just check carding and cash apping and Zelling, and then you kind of, before you go to the hair salon, you're like, okay, well, let's see, well, I think I'm good, right? You know what I mean? There's no discipline to it. So there is a certain value point in handwriting. Writing something out, writing out priorities. Don't sit down with Jimmy, and I know he say he's tired. No. Sit at the table before that beer and say, let's do these priorities. Let's write out our personal financial statement. Let's write out our income statement. Because if you're going to go to a financial advisor, it's kind of like this, what I tell people. You know, if you're going to come in and I'm going to talk to you, spend time, I'm like a doctor. You can't come in the doctor's office and say, I ain't doing vitals, I ain't doing x-rays, I ain't giving you no blood work, and I ain't doing no MRI. Well, what am I writing a prescription on? If you're going to work with an advisor, you got to be transparent, right? You know how it is in a bad relationship. Well, what I ain't want to tell you is, well, he was still kind of married. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You got to get the full scope of things. And this is what you got to do. Not only got to be transparent to someone else to hold you accountable, guide you, you got to be transparent to yourself. And that's what these tools do. And the last thing I will do, because I'm out of time and I want to pause for a few minutes and questions, this page, which is page 21. The whole idea is as I was talking, what I hope is that I have invoked things for you to think about doing. There's no necessarily right or wrong. The biggest crime to yourself is to write nothing on this page. Chart a course. Chart a course. Remember we used to always talk about what's your goals, write your goals down, and dream boards. We done got so digital, and we think looking at crazy stuff on YouTube and TikTok that feeds our imagination, there's a certain discipline to setting some time down, cutting all the noise out. And don't hit that Prosecco just yet. Sit down, reflect, think about it, clear your mind, write things down. Chart a course. This stuff ain't rocket science. White people been doing it for years. So what I'm saying is, tonight was just a discussion about frameworks. And I saw that I was out of time. I'll just pause to see if there's a few questions. And there's nothing that I won't talk about. My background is in the back. I know she talked about it. And that's only like, well, why are you in front of us? I've done a lot of things. I've been in financial services all my life, so I understand the cause and effect relationships. And I can give you different cases of things I've seen and observed in life, both good and bad. So if there's time for any quick questions, and then I'll just wrap up. Okay, 5 minutes or? Okay, well, I'm gonna look for you to. I'm married. I know how cues work. So my wife can say a lot of things with a stare. Any questions or reactions to anything that I've shared or discussed? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you're talking about working people. People who are retired, and you're retired, you have a pension, and you have all your finances set up. But the government always says we make too much money. Because you're gonna end up, in the end, not having enough taxes that you're giving, but they're saying you're not giving enough, or you don't have enough, so you won't offset what you owe. I moved back from Florida, so I didn't have a state tax. I moved to Georgia, and I got a state tax, so now I owe Georgia. I don't have no problem with that. But the other part is when you have your income set, and then, okay, you get a raise in your retirement, say it's 3%, okay? So over here, they're gonna raise your insurance, they're gonna raise your Medicare, or your cable gonna go up, this gonna go up. So you're talking about trying to offset, all of those things that's now got your budget all out of whack. And the other part about it is if you decide to go to work a part-time job, then again, you're gonna owe the government. It's like.
So what she's talking about is the treadmill. There's a couple things that I've heard. So the first thing is, if you owe tax, you can do either, generally speaking, one of two things, right? The first is you can increase your withholdings, which means Now you're just taking part of that monthly cash flow from it in order to pay the government the withholding. So that is an option. The other option that you can do is you can do sometimes charitable things, but that's tricky, right? Because the only way you can leverage something charitably is if your standard deductions are less than what you would do on a Schedule A to itemize. But even if you're itemizing, here's the tricky thing. On average, you literally fork out $3 to offset $1 of tax. So sometimes people get so obsessed with, I want to counter tax, that when you step back, it's like, what you doing? Sometimes it's just as simple as you have to deal with withholdings. Now, when you talked about going into part-time work, now that can be a little tricky, because typically the way that it works is when you're in your Social Security phase, for a certain number of years, when you get into the Social Security, 50 to 85% of your Social Security can then be added to your tax. And typically, if you have a pension, then all of a sudden your Social Security is being taxed. So it's like you all of a sudden feel like all you're doing is making more money for the government. Now the reality is, you can talk to a CPA who can model tax returns. So the reason why you want someone to model tax returns is because you can come up with different strategies and options. So say, for example, if you were a retired teacher, right? If you're a retired teacher or anything, you might be able to find a circumstance where you can create something that gives you 1099 income. And then you could set up a corporation, and in many ways an accountant could advise you to then start offsetting some of your daily living expenses against that income, and in many respects even build it where you can create a loss against the rest of the income to offset it. But again, I just named a lot of different pieces, and this is a difference from going to H&R Block versus talking to a CPA or a professional. Now the other headwind that retired people are dealing with, and this can be very painful, you have a lump sum of money that you take from your employer, your 403B, your 401k, your Section 457, or whichever those you have. Well, the messy thing is you blink, and now you're 72. Now you have mandatory distributions. So what happens is once you get to 72, and you're just kind of nursing this pot of money, you're just pinching a little bit to be cute or whatever. But the government say, no, I want my cut. So what they then do is basically, give or take, assume that you're going to die at 82 or